Welcome to the Long Road Stories. The highways of America stretch endlessly through deserts and mountains, silent, beautiful, and haunted. Tonight, we share a true story from Highway 93 in Nevada, where a veteran trucker was chased for over 2 hours by a light that shouldn't exist. Before we hit the road, make sure to subscribe for more true highway stories. Hit that like button and tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment, and it means more than you think. The following light. Daniel Hawkins had been driving commercial trucks for 28 years without ever believing in the supernatural. He had heard the legends whispered in truck stops and shared over CB radio channels. Stories about Highway 93 through Nevada, about a mysterious light that appears on the roadside and follows vehicles for miles. A light that matches your speed perfectly. When you accelerate, it accelerates. When you slow down, it slows down. Always staying exactly the same distance behind you, never catching up, but never falling back. Most drivers who encounter it say the experience lasts for an hour or more before the light simply vanishes as mysteriously as it appeared. But Daniel dismissed these stories as the fantasies of tired drivers who had spent too many hours alone on empty highways. On August 27, 2023, at exactly 11:43 in the evening, Daniel Hawkins learned that some legends are based on truth. A single sphere of brilliant white light appeared on the shoulder of Highway 93 as Daniel drove through one of the most isolated stretches of Nevada desert. The light began moving, following his truck, matching his every speed change with impossible precision. For 2 hours and 17 minutes, that light pursued Daniel through the darkness, an unexplained presence that defied every law of physics and logic. Daniel wasn't the first. Over the past 42 years, hundreds of drivers have reported encounters with the following light. Some describe it as white, others as blue or yellow, but all agree on its behavior. It appears without warning, chooses a vehicle to follow, and pursues it relentlessly until it decides to disappear. And the most disturbing fact, many fatal accidents on Highway 93 were preceded by sightings of the light. Survivors of crashes report seeing that strange light in their mirrors seconds before losing control of their vehicles. Is the light a witness to tragedy, or is it the cause? Tonight, you'll learn the truth about one of America's most enduring highway mysteries. Daniel Hawkins sat in his Freightliner Cascadia at a truck stop in Ely, Nevada, reviewing his delivery schedule on his tablet computer. It was 9:30 on a warm August evening, and Daniel had a load of construction equipment that needed to reach Las Vegas by noon the following day. The distance was approximately 250 miles via Highway 93 South, which Daniel calculated would take him roughly 4.5 hours of driving time, including a mandatory rest break. Daniel had run this route dozens of times over his nearly 3-decade career and knew every curve, every grade change, and every potential slowdown. Highway 93 through Nevada was one of the loneliest roads in America, especially the northern section between Ely and the town of Alamo. For over 150 miles, the highway cut through high desert wilderness with almost no human habitation visible from the road. Towns were few and far between, gas stations were rare, and cell phone coverage was virtually non-existent. Most truckers avoided this route if possible, preferring to take the longer but more developed Interstate 15 corridor. But Daniel didn't mind the isolation. He actually preferred the empty highways where he could drive for hours without encountering heavy traffic or the chaos of urban areas. At age 51, Daniel was what the industry called a million-miler, someone who had driven over 1 million accident-free miles during their career. He took enormous pride in his perfect safety record and his reputation for reliability. Daniel's current truck was a 2022 Freightliner Cascadia equipped with the latest safety technology, including adaptive cruise control, collision warning systems, and lane departure alerts. The truck was painted in a burgundy color with silver accents, and Daniel had named it Desert Runner, in recognition of the many miles he had logged crossing America's southwestern deserts. His cargo tonight consisted of pallets of concrete forms and rebar headed for a construction site in North Las Vegas. The load weighed 36,000 pounds, well within his truck's capacity. Daniel performed his standard pre-trip inspection, methodically checking tires, brakes, lights, and securing straps. Everything was in perfect condition. At 10:15, Daniel started his engine and pulled out of the truck stop in Ely, merging onto Highway 93 southbound. The night was clear and warm, with temperatures still hovering around 75 degrees despite the late hour. A nearly full moon hung in the eastern sky, providing surprising amounts of illumination across the desert landscape. Daniel turned on his headlights and settled into his seat for the long drive ahead. The first 30 minutes of driving were completely routine. Daniel passed through the outskirts of Ely and continued south into open desert. The highway was a well-maintained two-lane road with one lane in each direction, separated by a double yellow line. Traffic was extremely light, with Daniel encountering perhaps 3 or 4 other vehicles heading in the opposite direction during the first half hour. No vehicles were traveling in his direction, which meant Daniel had the southbound lane entirely to himself. At 10:50, Daniel passed through the tiny settlement of Lund, which consisted of little more than a few buildings and a closed gas station. Beyond Lund, the highway entered even more remote territory. The landscape was classic high desert, featuring sagebrush, scattered juniper trees, and occasional rocky outcroppings. Mountains were visible in the distance on both sides of the highway, their dark silhouettes framed against the star-filled sky. Daniel listened to a country music station on his satellite radio, humming along to familiar songs. His dashboard instruments all showed normal readings, and his GPS indicated he was making excellent time. The highway climbed gradually as it crossed several low mountain passes, then descended into broad valleys. Daniel shifted gears smoothly, using his engine brake on the descents to maintain safe speeds. The moon provided enough light that Daniel could see the desert landscape extending far from the highway on both sides. It was beautiful in a stark, empty way. This was the Nevada that most people never saw, the vast, unpopulated spaces between cities where nature remained largely undisturbed by human activity. Daniel checked his mirrors regularly out of habit, even though there was no traffic behind him. The road stretched empty into the distance, illuminated by his trailer's running lights. At 11:30, Daniel passed a highway sign indicating he was approaching the halfway point of his journey. Las Vegas was still 130 miles ahead, and he was right on schedule. Daniel decided to push through without taking a break, knowing he could rest when he reached Las Vegas, well ahead of his delivery deadline. The highway continued south through absolutely empty desert. No buildings, no lights, no signs of human presence except for the asphalt road itself and the occasional mile marker. Daniel had driven many lonely roads during his career, but Highway 93, through this section of Nevada, was among the most isolated. Some truckers found this level of emptiness unsettling, but Daniel appreciated the solitude. It gave him time to think, to plan, to simply exist, without the constant demands and interruptions of modern life-connected world. At 11:41, Daniel noticed his CB radio beginning to emit strange static. Not the normal background noise, but a rhythmic pulsing sound that rose and fell in regular intervals. Daniel frowned and reached for the volume knob, turning down the radio. He had experienced electrical interference before, usually caused by power lines or radio towers, but there were no such structures visible in this remote area. The static continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Daniel turned the volume back up and continued driving. 2 minutes later, at exactly 11:43 p.m., according to Daniel's dashboard clock, something appeared on the shoulder of the highway behind him. Daniel first noticed it as a reflection in his driver's side mirror. A light, a single, bright, white light sitting stationary on the right shoulder of the road, approximately a quarter-mile back. Daniel's first thought was that another vehicle had pulled over, perhaps experiencing mechanical trouble. But the light didn't look like headlights or emergency flashes. It was a single point of intense white illumination, seemingly floating about 6 feet above the ground. Daniel watched the light in his mirror as his truck continued south. The light remained stationary for perhaps 10 seconds. Then it began to move, not like a vehicle pulling back onto the highway, but more like it was floating forward, gliding across the pavement without any visible means of propulsion. The light maintained its position on the right shoulder, not entering the traffic lane, but definitely moving in the same direction Daniel was traveling. And it was accelerating. Daniel reduced his speed slightly, curious about what he was seeing. Was it some kind of experimental aircraft, a drone with an unusually bright light? But as Daniel slowed from 65 to 60 miles per hour, the light also slowed, matching his new speed exactly. It maintained a constant distance of approximately a quarter mile behind Daniel's trailer. Daniel felt the first stirrings of unease. He pressed down on his accelerator, bringing his speed back up to 65. The light accelerated with him, once again maintaining that precise quarter-mile separation. Daniel tried varying his speed randomly, 70 miles per hour. The light sped up, 55 miles per hour. The light slowed down, always staying exactly the same distance behind him, as if it were tethered to his truck by an invisible rope. Daniel grabbed his CB radio microphone and keyed the transmit button. "This is Desert Runner southbound on Highway 93 at mile marker 87. Is anyone monitoring this channel?" Static was his only answer. Daniel tried again. "Desert Runner to any vehicle on Highway 93. I'm observing an unusual light on the highway and requesting information. Does anyone copy?" Still nothing but static. Daniel released the microphone and focused on driving while keeping one eye on his mirror. The light continued to follow, that brilliant white sphere moving smoothly along the shoulder. Daniel tried to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe it was some kind of meteorological phenomenon, like ball lightning or swamp gas. But Daniel had lived in Nevada for 20 years and had never heard of such things occurring in the high desert. Besides, the light was clearly following him, responding to his speed changes. Natural phenomena didn't do that. Daniel reached for his cell phone, intending to take a photograph or video of the light, but when he looked at his phone screen, it showed no signal. He was in a dead zone, which was common in this remote area. Even if he had signal, who would he call? The police. And say what? "There's a mysterious light following my truck." Daniel continued south on Highway 93, and the light continued to follow. 5 minutes passed, 10 minutes, 15. The light never wavered, never changed its distance, never did anything except maintain that perfect quarter-mile separation. Daniel's unease was transforming into genuine fear. This wasn't normal. This wasn't explainable. This was something fundamentally wrong, something that violated the natural order of things. At midnight exactly, Daniel approached a long straight section of highway that stretched for several miles through a perfectly flat valley. Daniel had an idea. He would accelerate as hard as his truck could manage and try to outrun the light. Maybe if he could build enough distance, the light would give up and stop following him. Daniel pressed his accelerator to the floor. His Freightliner's engine roared and the truck surged forward. 55 miles per hour, 60, 65, 70, 75. Daniel was now traveling well above the posted 65 mile per hour speed limit, pushing his truck faster than was safe with a loaded trailer, 80 miles per hour. Daniel watched his mirror. The light accelerated effortlessly, matching his speed increase perfectly and maintaining that exact quarter-mile distance. It was as if the light knew exactly how fast Daniel was traveling and could adjust its own speed instantaneously. Daniel held his speed at 80 for a full mile, hoping to see the light fall behind, but it stayed locked in position, that brilliant white sphere gliding along the shoulder with impossible precision. Daniel reduced his speed back to 65, his heart pounding. The light also slowed, resuming its patient pursuit. Daniel was now genuinely terrified. Whatever this thing was, it was not bound by normal physics. It could match any speed Daniel chose, could maintain perfect distance regardless of his actions. And it had chosen him. Of all the vehicles that must have passed this way, the light had selected Daniel's truck to follow. Why? What did it want? Daniel tried to remember the legends he had heard about Highway 93, something about a light that follows truckers, something about accidents. Daniel's memory was hazy on the details because he had never paid attention to such stories. Now he wished he had listened more carefully. Maybe other drivers who had experienced this could have told him what to do, how to escape, how to survive. At 12:17 in the morning, Daniel passed through the small town of Alamo. The town's lights were a welcome sight, proof that civilization still existed. Daniel considered pulling off the highway and stopping in town, thinking maybe the light wouldn't follow him off the main road. But as he approached the Alamo exit, Daniel looked in his mirror and saw the light was still there, still following. And Daniel had a strong intuition that stopping would be a mistake. If he stopped his truck, what would the light do? Would it stop also? Would it approach his vehicle? Would it do something worse? Daniel decided to keep moving. As long as he was driving, the light seemed content to follow at a distance. Breaking that pattern might provoke some kind of change in the light's behavior, and Daniel didn't want to find out what that change might be. Daniel drove through Alamo without stopping and continued south. The highway beyond Alamo entered another long stretch of empty desert. Daniel checked his fuel gauge and saw he had about a third of a tank remaining. That was good for approximately 100 miles, more than enough to reach Las Vegas. But Daniel's delivery wasn't the concern anymore. Survival was. At 12:45, Daniel's CB radio crackled to life without warning. A voice emerged from the static, male, sounding old and tired. "Driver on Highway 93 southbound. Can you hear me?" Daniel grabbed his microphone. Yes, I can hear you. Who is this?" The voice continued as if it hadn't heard Daniel. "If you're seeing the light, don't stop, don't ever stop. Keep driving until it goes away. It will go away eventually, it always does. But if you stop, you'll end up like the others." "What others?" Daniel shouted into the microphone. "Who are you? What is this light?" But the voice was gone, replaced by static. Daniel tried repeatedly to raise the mysterious voice again, but heard only silence. Someone else knew about the light. Someone who had perhaps encountered it before and survived. And that person's advice was clear: keep driving. As Daniel continued driving south with the light maintaining its relentless pursuit, fragments of old conversations began surfacing in his memory. Stories he had heard years ago in truck stops and rest areas, tales he had dismissed as fantasy, but which now seemed terrifyingly relevant. Daniel remembered a conversation at a truck stop in Ely about 3 years earlier. An old driver named Carl something or other had been talking about Highway 93 and had mentioned the light that follows. Carl had described it exactly as Daniel was experiencing it now, a bright sphere that appeared on the roadside and pursued vehicles for miles, matching their speed perfectly. Carl claimed he had encountered the light twice during his 40-year career, both times on Highway 93 between Ely and Las Vegas. The first encounter had lasted about an hour before the light simply vanished. The second encounter had lasted longer, maybe 90 minutes, and Carl admitted it had terrified him so badly that he had avoided Highway 93 for years afterward. Daniel wished he could remember more of Carl's story. Had Carl mentioned anything about what the light wanted? Had he offered any explanation for the phenomenon? But Daniel's memory was frustratingly vague. He had been only half listening at the time, more interested in his coffee and sandwich than in what he considered an old man's tall tales. Daniel also remembered reading something online years ago about Highway 93 being investigated by the Nevada Highway Patrol in the 1980s. There had been a series of fatal accidents on the highway, and several surviving witnesses had mentioned seeing a strange light before the crashes occurred. The investigation had been extensive, involving multiple state agencies and even some federal authorities, but ultimately no explanation had been found for the light sightings, and the whole thing had been classified as mass hysteria or a persistent urban legend. The investigation had concluded that the accidents were caused by driver error, fatigue, and the challenging nature of the road itself, not by any supernatural phenomena. But what if the investigators had been wrong? What if they had dismissed credible witness testimony because it didn't fit their expectations of what was possible? Daniel was now experiencing exactly what those witnesses had described, and it was undeniably real. At 1:15 in the morning, Daniel passed mile marker 42. Las Vegas was approximately 70 miles ahead, less than 90 minutes of driving at his current speed. Daniel made a decision. He would drive straight to Las Vegas without stopping. Once he reached the city limits and entered heavily populated areas, surely the light would leave him alone. Whatever this thing was, it seemed to prefer empty highways and isolated areas. Urban environments with thousands of people and constant activity might discourage it. The light continued its pursuit, that unwavering white sphere in Daniel's mirror. Daniel found himself checking his mirror compulsively every few seconds, unable to look away for long. The light had become the center of his universe, the only thing that mattered. Every other concern, his delivery, his schedule, his truck's mechanical condition, had faded to insignificance. There was only the road ahead and the light behind, and the desperate need to keep moving until this nightmare ended. At 1:35, Daniel noticed something new. The light seemed to be pulsing very slightly, growing fractionally brighter and dimmer in a slow rhythm. The pulsations were subtle, barely noticeable, but they gave the light an almost organic quality, as if it were breathing. Daniel felt his fear deepen. Was the light alive somehow? Was it a conscious entity capable of thought and intention? The idea seemed insane, but no more insane than a sphere of light following him with perfect precision for over an hour. Daniel tried his cell phone again, hoping he might have entered an area with signal coverage. The screen showed one bar. Daniel quickly dialed 911. The call connected, and a dispatcher answered. 911, what is your emergency? Daniel tried to speak calmly, but his voice came out strained and panicked. I'm a truck driver on Highway 93 southbound, approaching mile marker 38. There's something following me. A light. I don't know what it is, but it's been pursuing my truck for over an hour. There was a pause. Daniel could hear the dispatcher typing. Sir, can you describe this light? Is it another vehicle? No, Daniel said. It's not a vehicle. It's just a light. A sphere of bright white light floating above the road. It follows me exactly, matching whatever speed I'm driving. I've tried to outrun it, but it's impossible. Another pause. Sir, have you taken any medications today? Have you consumed any alcohol or other substances? Daniel felt frustration rising. I'm completely sober. This is real. There's something on this highway and I need help. The dispatcher's voice remained professionally calm. Sir, I'm going to dispatch a highway patrol unit to your location to check on your welfare. Can you safely pull over and wait for the officer? No! Daniel almost shouted. I can't stop. I was warned not to stop. I just need someone to witness this, to confirm I'm not hallucinating. Sir, please remain calm. An officer is being dispatched to your location now. Can you tell me your exact position? Daniel looked at his GPS. I'm passing mile marker 35 right now, still southbound on Highway 93. The officer should reach you within approximately 15 minutes. Please continue driving normally and stay on the line with me. Daniel agreed and kept his phone to his ear while driving, the dispatcher asking him routine questions to keep him engaged and assess his mental state. Behind him, the light continued its relentless pursuit. 12 minutes later, Daniel saw red and blue flashing lights approaching from behind. A Nevada Highway Patrol cruiser was coming up fast, closing the distance between itself and Daniel's truck. Daniel watched in his mirror, hoping desperately that the patrol officer would see the light and confirm Daniel wasn't insane. The cruiser pulled up behind Daniel's trailer, and Daniel expected the officer to slow down upon seeing the light that must be visible between the cruiser and Daniel's truck. But the patrol car continued forward, passing the location where the light should be, apparently seeing nothing. The cruiser pulled alongside Daniel's truck, and the officer gestured for Daniel to pull over. Daniel complied, guiding his truck onto the shoulder and coming to a stop. The light also stopped, maintaining its quarter-mile distance behind Daniel's now stationary vehicle. The patrol officer, a young man probably in his late 20s, approached Daniel's driver's side window. Daniel rolled it down. "Good evening, sir," the officer said, shining his flashlight into the cab. "I received a call about a driver experiencing some kind of disturbance. Are you okay?" Daniel pointed back down the highway. "Do you see that light? About a quarter-mile back? It's been following me for over an hour and a half." The officer turned and looked down the highway, his flashlight sweeping the area. "Sir, I don't see any light. The highway is empty." "What?" Daniel leaned out his window, looking back. The light was clearly visible, that brilliant white sphere hovering above the shoulder. "It's right there! How can you not see it?" The officer looked back again, then returned his attention to Daniel with obvious concern. "Sir, there is no light on the highway. I drove right through that area to reach you and I saw nothing." Daniel felt panic rising. "This is just like what happened before. No one else can see it. But it's there. I swear it's there." The officer studied Daniel carefully. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step down from your vehicle. I need to perform a field sobriety test to make sure you're okay to drive." Daniel wanted to argue, to insist the officer believe him, but he could see it was pointless. Just like with the phantom truck in other stories he had heard, the light was invisible to everyone except its chosen victim. Daniel climbed down from his cab, his legs shaky. The officer conducted several sobriety tests, all of which Daniel passed easily. He was completely sober, alert, and in control of his faculties. The officer seemed puzzled. "Mr. Hawkins, you're clearly not impaired, but I need you to understand that there is no light following you. I've driven this highway for 6 years and I've never seen anything like what you're describing." Daniel gestured frantically toward the light. "But it's right there. I can see it as clearly as I can see you." The officer followed Daniel's gesture and saw only empty highway. "Sir, I think you're experiencing some kind of fatigue-related hallucination. It's very common among long-haul drivers who push themselves too hard. My strong recommendation is that you park your truck here and get some sleep before continuing." Daniel shook his head. "I can't stop. I was warned not to stop. As long as I keep moving, the light stays back. But if I stop for too long, I don't know what will happen." The officer sighed. "Mr. Hawkins, I can't force you to rest, but I can't let you continue driving if I believe you're impaired. Right now, you're passing all the sobriety tests, which suggests you're physically capable of driving, but you're clearly experiencing some kind of psychological distress." Daniel made a decision. He would lie. "Officer, you're right. I think I have been pushing too hard. Maybe I am hallucinating. I'll park here and get some sleep before continuing." The officer looked relieved. "That's a wise decision, sir. There's a rest area about 20 miles ahead if you want to sleep somewhere with facilities." Daniel nodded. "I'll do that. Thank you for checking on me." The officer returned to his cruiser and drove away, leaving Daniel alone on the shoulder with his truck. Daniel looked back at the light. It was still there, maintaining its distance. Daniel climbed back into his cab and sat thinking. The officer had confirmed what Daniel suspected. The light was visible only to Daniel, which meant getting help from authorities was impossible. No one would believe him. No one could see what was happening. Daniel was on his own, and that mysterious CB radio voice had warned him not to stop. But Daniel had just stopped, and nothing terrible had happened. The light hadn't approached. It had simply waited patiently, maintaining its distance. Maybe stopping was safe after all. Maybe Daniel could just wait here until dawn, and perhaps the light would disappear with the sunrise. Daniel checked the time. It was 2:07 in the morning. Sunrise in late August in Nevada would be around 6:15, more than 4 hours away. Could Daniel sit here for 4 hours, watching that light in his mirror, waiting for dawn? The thought of spending that long trapped in this situation was unbearable. Daniel decided to keep driving. He started his engine and pulled back onto the highway, accelerating south toward Las Vegas. The light immediately resumed following, gliding forward from its stationary position and matching Daniel's speed. The pattern continued. Daniel driving, the light following, the distance between them never changing. As Daniel drove through the night with his supernatural pursuer, he tried to focus his mind on remembering every detail of the legends he had heard about Highway 93. There had been a name, someone who was supposed to be connected to the light. Raymond something, Raymond Cole. Yes, that was it. Daniel had heard the name mentioned in truck stops, always spoken in hushed tones by older drivers who claimed to know the truth about Highway 93. Raymond Cole had been a trucker back in the 1980s, so the story went. He had driven Highway 93 regularly, running routes between Ely and Las Vegas several times a week. Raymond had been proud of his truck, a well-maintained Kenworth that he kept in perfect condition. He'd spent years paying off the truck, and it represented his life's work and his financial security. In October of 1981, Raymond had stopped at a truck stop in Alamo to grab dinner. When he came out 30 minutes later, his truck was gone, stolen. Raymond had reported the theft to police immediately, but his truck was never recovered. Without his truck, Raymond couldn't work. He lost his job, lost his ability to make loan payments, and fell into financial ruin. The stress and depression became overwhelming. In December of 1981, Raymond Cole's body was found on the shoulder of Highway 93 near mile marker 53. He had died of exposure to the cold, having apparently wandered onto the highway on foot and collapsed. The official cause of death was listed as hypothermia, complicated by alcohol intoxication. But the legend said something different. The legend claimed Raymond hadn't died from exposure. He had died from a broken heart, from the loss of everything he had worked for. And his spirit, unable to accept that loss, began wandering Highway 93, searching for his stolen truck, following any truck that reminded him of what he had lost. Daniel didn't know if he believed the legend. It sounded like the kind of story that grew and changed over years, taking on details that might not be true. But something was following him, and it had started following around the same general area where Raymond's body had been found. Daniel checked his GPS. He had passed mile marker 53 over an hour ago, shortly before the light first appeared. Mile marker 53. The location matched. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm night air. If the legend was true, if the light was somehow Raymond Cole's spirit, what did it want from Daniel? Was it searching for its lost truck among the thousands of trucks that traveled this highway? And if so, what happened when it realized Daniel's truck wasn't the one it sought? Daniel tried to think logically about the situation. Assuming the light was a paranormal entity, it was behaving in a very specific way. It followed from a distance. It matched speeds. It didn't approach or attack. Its behavior suggested observation rather than aggression. Maybe it was simply following trucks out of habit or compulsion, drawn to them by some connection to Raymond's lost vehicle. Maybe it meant no harm and would eventually lose interest and disappear. At 2:45 in the morning, Daniel saw the glow of Las Vegas on the horizon. The city created a dome of light pollution that was visible for many miles across the dark desert. Daniel felt hope stirring. He was approaching civilization, safety, the end of this nightmare. But then Daniel noticed something that made his hope crumble. The light behind him was growing brighter and closer. For the first time since it had appeared nearly 2 hours earlier, the light was changing its behavior. It was still on the shoulder, still moving at the same speed as Daniel's truck, but it was slowly, steadily closing the distance. The quarter-mile gap was shrinking. 2,000 feet, 1,800 feet, 1,500 feet. The light was getting closer, and its intensity was increasing. What had been a bright white sphere was now becoming almost painfully brilliant, like looking at a welding arc. Daniel pressed down on his accelerator, bringing his speed up to 75 miles per hour. The light matched his acceleration, but continued to close the gap. 1,200 feet, 900 feet, 600 feet. Daniel's heart was racing. The light had been content to follow from a distance for over 2 hours. Why was it changing now? Was it because Daniel was approaching Las Vegas? Did the light need to do something before Daniel reached the safety of the city? At 3:03 in the morning, with Las Vegas only 15 miles ahead, the light was just 300 feet behind Daniel's trailer. At this distance, Daniel could see details he hadn't been able to make out before. The light wasn't perfectly spherical. It had an irregular, pulsing quality, and within the brightness, there seemed to be a darker core, as if the light was surrounding something solid. Daniel pushed his truck to 80 miles per hour, the fastest he dared to go with a loaded trailer on this highway. The light matched his speed and continued to advance. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. The light was now close enough that its illumination was flooding Daniel's cab, casting harsh shadows and making it difficult to see. Daniel squinted against the glare, trying to keep his eyes on the road ahead. Then, at exactly 3:07 in the morning, the light moved. It left the shoulder and entered the southbound lane, positioning itself directly behind Daniel's trailer. The brilliant sphere was now following him in the traffic lane, just 20 feet from his rear bumper. Daniel could see nothing in his mirrors except blinding white light. His entire field of rear vision was whited out. Daniel tried to accelerate further, but his truck was already at its maximum safe speed. The light stayed locked in position behind him, so close that if Daniel braked even slightly, the light would have crashed into his trailer, if it were a physical object. Daniel's mind was racing as fast as his truck. What was happening? Why had the light moved from the shoulder to the lane? What did it want? Then Daniel heard it. A voice, not from the CB radio, not from his phone. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding him, filling the cab. The voice was male, quiet, sad, infinitely weary. "Is it mine?" the voice asked. "Is this one mine?" Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His throat was dry. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. The voice asked again, more insistent. "Is it mine? Did you take it from me?" Daniel finally found his voice. "Take what? I didn't take anything from you." "My truck," the voice said. "They took my truck. I've been looking for it. I need it back. Is this one mine?" Understanding crashed over Daniel like a wave. The legend was true. This was Raymond Cole, or what was left of him. The spirit of a trucker who had lost everything and was now condemned to wander this highway forever, searching for what he had lost. "No," Daniel said, his voice shaking. "This isn't your truck. This is my truck. I didn't take anything from you. I'm just trying to make a living, same as you did." The voice was silent for a moment, then, "Show me." "Show you what?" Daniel asked. "Show me it's not mine. Let me see. Let me know." Daniel understood what the voice wanted. Raymond's spirit needed to confirm that Daniel's truck wasn't the stolen Kenworth from 1981. It needed to see inside, to verify this wasn't what it had been searching for. But how could Daniel show a ghost his truck? The answer came to Daniel in a flash of inspiration. The loading papers. Every commercial truck carried documentation showing what cargo it hauled, who owned the truck, and when it was manufactured. If Daniel could show those papers to Raymond's spirit, maybe it would confirm this wasn't the truck he sought. Daniel reached across to his passenger seat where he kept his paperwork. With one hand on the wheel, he grabbed the folder and held it up toward his rear window, toward the blinding light. "Look!" Daniel shouted. 2022 Freightliner Cascadia. Manufactured 40 years after your truck was stolen. This can't be yours." The light flared even brighter for a moment, so intense that Daniel had to close his eyes. He felt warmth, like standing near a bonfire. Then the intensity began to fade. Daniel opened his eyes and looked in his mirror. The light was moving backward, retreating from its position directly behind his trailer. It drifted back to the shoulder, and as it did, it began to dim. "Not mine," the voice said, sadness permeating every word. "Not mine. Keep looking. Have to keep looking." "Wait!" Daniel called out. "Raymond Cole! Is that your name? Are you Raymond Cole?" But the voice was gone. The light continued to dim, growing fainter and smaller. Within 30 seconds, it had reduced to nothing more than a faint glow on the shoulder. Then it winked out completely. disappearing as if it had never existed. Daniel drove in stunned silence for several minutes, his eyes constantly checking his mirrors for any sign of the light's return. But the highway behind him remained dark and empty. At 3:25 in the morning, Daniel reached the outskirts of North Las Vegas. The transition from empty desert to suburban development was abrupt. One moment Daniel was on an isolated highway, the next he was passing gas stations, strip malls, and residential neighborhoods. The lights of civilization had never looked so beautiful. Daniel pulled into the first truck stop he saw and parked in an open spot. He shut off his engine and sat in the silence of his cab, his hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline. For over 2 hours, he'd been pursued by something that shouldn't exist. He had heard a ghost speak to him. He had witnessed the impossible. Daniel grabbed his phone, which now showed full signal strength in the city, and typed a search query: Raymond Cole Trucker, Nevada, 1981. The search results made Daniel's breath catch. There was a Raymond Cole, a trucker who had worked routes through Nevada in the early 1980s. And according to a brief article from the Ely Daily Times newspaper, Raymond Cole had indeed reported his truck stolen from an Alamo truck stop in October of 1981. The article was dated October 8, 1981. Daniel searched for more information and found Raymond's death notice from December of the same year. Raymond Cole, age 37, found deceased on Highway 93 near mile marker 53, survived by a sister in Reno and an elderly mother in California. Services held at a funeral home in Ely. The details matched the legend exactly. Raymond Cole had been real. His truck had been stolen. He had died on Highway 93, and now, apparently, his spirit wandered that same highway, searching endlessly for what he had lost. Daniel spent the next hour sitting in his truck, researching everything he could find about encounters with mysterious lights on Highway 93. The documented sightings went back decades. A police report from 1983 described multiple witness accounts of an unexplained light phenomenon on Highway 93. The Nevada Highway Patrol had investigated and found no explanation. Reports continued through the 1990s and 2000s, with dozens of drivers claiming to have seen a mysterious light that followed their vehicles. Some reports described the light lasting for just a few minutes. Others, like Daniel's experience, described pursuits lasting an hour or more. And most disturbing, Daniel found references to fatal accidents that occurred shortly after drivers reported seeing the light. In March of 1987, a truck driver named Michael Brennan had called Highway Patrol to report a strange light following him on Highway 93. 20 minutes after that call, Brennan's truck left the road and rolled multiple times, killing him instantly. Investigators found no mechanical failure and no obvious cause for the accident. In June of 1994, a family of 4 driving a minivan from Ely to Las Vegas reported seeing a bright white light that followed our car for over an hour on Highway 93. The family made it to Las Vegas safely, but the father reported being so distracted by the light that he nearly lost control several times. In October of 2003, another trucker named Sarah Martinez reported an encounter with the light. Sarah survived, but she described being so terrified during the experience that she never drove Highway 93 again. She quit trucking entirely a year later, unable to overcome her fear of encountering the light again. Daniel found an academic paper written by a University of Nevada researcher in 2007. The paper, titled "The Following Light of Highway 93, a Case Study in Persistent Folkloric Phenomena," examined the history of the sightings. The researcher had interviewed 37 people who claimed to have encountered the light. The descriptions were remarkably consistent: a bright sphere, white or occasionally blue, appearing on the shoulder and following vehicles for extended periods. The researchers' conclusion was that the phenomenon represented a form of mass hallucination or shared cultural delusion, possibly triggered by the monotony of driving through empty desert, combined with the power of suggestion from hearing the legend. But Daniel knew the academic was wrong. What he had experienced wasn't a hallucination. The light had been real. It had moved with intelligence and purpose. It had communicated with him. And it was connected to Raymond Cole, a real person who had died in real tragedy. At 4:30 in the morning, Daniel finally felt ready to move. He started his truck and completed the final 10 miles to his delivery location. The warehouse wasn't open yet, so Daniel parked in the lot and tried to get some sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time Daniel closed his eyes, he saw that brilliant white light in his mirror, heard that sad voice asking, "Is it mine?" At 6 in the morning, Daniel gave up on sleep and walked to a nearby diner for breakfast. Over coffee and eggs, Daniel made a decision. He would warn other drivers. He would share his story. Maybe he couldn't stop the light from appearing, but he could help people understand what it was and how to survive an encounter. Over the following weeks, Daniel became obsessed with understanding the following light. He contacted every driver he could find who had reported an encounter, collecting their stories and looking for patterns. Daniel discovered that encounters with the light had increased dramatically since Raymond Cole's death in 1981. Before 1981, there were virtually no reports of lights following vehicles on Highway 93. After 1981, reports began appearing almost immediately and continued to the present day. The pattern was clear. Raymond's death had created the phenomenon. Daniel also noticed that the light appeared most frequently near mile marker 53, the location where Raymond's body had been found. Nearly 80% of reported encounters began within a 5-mile radius of that marker. The light would appear on the shoulder, choose a vehicle, and follow it for varying distances before eventually disappearing. Most encounters lasted between 30 minutes and 2 hours. Daniel's experience of over 2 hours was on the longer end, but not unprecedented. Daniel found several other drivers who, like him, had experienced the light attempting to communicate. One driver, a man named Thomas Liu, reported hearing a voice asking, "Where is it? Where did you hide it?" Thomas had been terrified and unable to respond. The light had followed him for 90 minutes before disappearing. Another driver, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, described the voice asking, "Can you help me find it?" Jennifer had tried to respond, asking what the voice was looking for, but received no answer. The light had simply continued following until it eventually vanished near Las Vegas. Daniel compiled all his research into a detailed document and posted it on several trucking forums and paranormal investigation websites. He titled it "The Following Light, a complete investigation of Highway 93's most persistent mystery." Within days, Daniel received dozens of responses. Most were from drivers thanking him for explaining something they had experienced but never understood. A few were from researchers interested in investigating further, and several were from people claiming to have information about Raymond Cole. One email in particular caught Daniel's attention. It was from a woman named Patricia Cole Harrison, who identified herself as Raymond Cole's niece. Patricia explained that Raymond's stolen truck had never been recovered. The theft had destroyed Raymond financially and emotionally. Patricia had been only 8 years old when Raymond died, but she remembered her family's grief and anger. Raymond's mother had died believing her son had been murdered, though police found no evidence of foul play. Patricia shared family photographs with Daniel. One photo showed Raymond standing proudly beside his truck, a 1978 Kenworth painted in blue and white. Raymond was smiling, his hand resting on the truck's hood. The photo was dated June 1981, just 4 months before the truck was stolen. Patricia also shared Raymond's obituary, which mentioned that he was a dedicated driver who loved the open road and took great pride in his work. The obituary asked that donations be made to a truck driver assistance fund rather than flowers. Daniel studied the photograph for a long time. Raymond Cole had been a real person with hopes and dreams. He had worked hard, saved money, and invested everything in his truck. When that truck was stolen, it had taken more than just a vehicle. It had taken Raymond's livelihood, his identity, his future. Was it any wonder that his spirit couldn't rest? Daniel decided to visit mile marker 53 on Highway 93, the location where Raymond's body had been found. Daniel made the trip on a bright Sunday afternoon when the desert was peaceful and the highway was quiet. Mile marker 53 was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by sagebrush and emptiness. There was nothing to indicate what had happened there over 40 years earlier. No memorial, no marker, nothing but the highway and the desert. Daniel stood on the shoulder where Raymond must have collapsed. He tried to imagine what Raymond's final hours had been like, walking along this highway in December, cold, possibly drunk, certainly despairing, lying down on the cold ground and never getting up again. It was a sad, lonely death. Daniel spoke aloud, feeling foolish but determined. "Raymond Cole, if you can hear me, I want you to know I understand. I know about your truck. I know about what happened to you, and I'm sorry. You deserved better." The wind blew across the desert, rustling the sagebrush, but there was no other response. Daniel hadn't really expected one. Ghosts didn't appear in broad daylight, especially on busy highways. But Daniel felt it was important to acknowledge Raymond as a person, not just a scary story. As Daniel drove back to Las Vegas, he made a decision. He would try to find Raymond's stolen truck. It was a long shot after 43 years, but if the truck could be located, maybe it would bring Raymond's spirit some peace. Maybe the haunting would end. Daniel began researching vehicle tracking methods, checking with salvage yards, consulting with police departments. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests for records related to the theft investigation. He contacted truck restoration enthusiasts who might have encountered a 1978 Kenworth with Raymond's vehicle identification number. Months passed. Daniel's investigation into Raymond's stolen truck yielded frustratingly little information. The original police reports from 1981 were sparse. Raymond had reported the theft, given a description of his truck including its VIN and license plate, and detectives had entered the information into national databases, but no leads had ever developed. The truck had simply vanished. Daniel contacted truck salvage yards across the southwestern United States, asking if they had any records of a 1978 Kenworth matching Raymond's description being processed in the 1980s or 90s. Most yards had no records going back that far. A few remembered vehicles that might have matched, but without VIN numbers, there was no way to confirm. Daniel found one promising lead in Arizona. A salvage yard owner remembered buying a heavily damaged Kenworth in 1983 that had been painted over in an obvious attempt to disguise its original color. The owner couldn't remember the VIN, but the description matched Raymond's truck. Unfortunately, the truck had been completely disassembled and sold for parts over 40 years ago. If it had been Raymond's truck, it was now scattered across dozens of other vehicles and would be impossible to locate. Daniel shared his findings with Patricia Cole Harrison, who thanked him for trying but admitted she didn't expect the truck would ever be found. Patricia had made peace with her uncle's death long ago, but she appreciated Daniel's efforts to honor Raymond's memory. Meanwhile, reports of the following light continued. Daniel maintained his website documenting encounters and had now collected over 200 accounts from drivers who claimed to have experienced the phenomenon. The patterns remained consistent. Appearances near mile marker 53, pursuits lasting 30 minutes to 2 hours, the light matching vehicle speeds perfectly, and occasional reports of a voice asking about a lost truck. Daniel remained in contact with other survivors of encounters with the light. They had formed an informal support group, sharing strategies for coping with the experience and warnings about when and where the light seemed most active. Several patterns emerged from their collective experiences. The light appeared most frequently on nights when the moon was full or nearly full, though there were exceptions. It seemed to prefer trucks over cars, choosing truckers about 70% of the time. And it appeared to avoid holidays and weekends, being most active on weekday nights when commercial traffic was heaviest. One driver, a man named Robert Chen, reported a second encounter with the light approximately 2 years after his first experience. Robert's first encounter had been similar to Daniel's, lasting about 90 minutes before the light disappeared. Robert's second encounter was much shorter, lasting only 20 minutes. Robert theorized that the light might recognize vehicles or drivers it had already checked, spending less time on repeat encounters once it determined they weren't what it sought. Daniel found this theory intriguing. If the light was indeed Raymond's spirit searching for his stolen truck, it made sense that it would remember trucks it had already investigated and dismiss them more quickly on subsequent encounters. This suggested the light possessed memory and learning capability, further evidence that it was a conscious entity rather than a mindless phenomenon. In October of 2024, Daniel received an email that made his heart race. A man named Gregory Sanchez, who worked at a vehicle restoration shop in California, believed he might have information about Raymond's truck. Gregory explained that his shop had acquired a 1978 Kenworth from an estate sale in Nevada 5 years earlier. The truck had been in very poor condition and sat in their yard waiting for restoration. While inventorying the truck, Gregory had found some old paperwork hidden under the passenger seat. The paperwork included a registration from 1981 with the name Raymond Cole. Daniel immediately contacted Gregory Sanchez and arranged to visit the restoration shop in California. 3 days later, Daniel stood in a dusty lot looking at what might be Raymond Cole's stolen truck. The Kenworth was in terrible condition. The paint was faded and peeling, revealing multiple layers of different colors underneath. The tires were flat and rotted. The interior was filthy and filled with debris. But the VIN number, stamped on a plate on the driver's side doorframe, matched the number from Raymond's theft report. This was it. After 43 years, Raymond Cole's truck had been found. Gregory explained that he had purchased the truck from an estate sale in Boulder City, Nevada. The previous owner had been an elderly man named Frank Torrens, who had died at age 87. Frank's family had no information about where or when Frank had acquired the truck, only that it had sat in his yard for as long as anyone could remember. Daniel contacted Patricia Cole Harrison with the news. Patricia was stunned. She had never expected the truck to be found. Together, they decided on a course of action. Patricia, as Raymond's only living relative, legally claimed ownership of the truck. Daniel arranged for the truck to be transported to a location near mile marker 53 on Highway 93, and on December 6, 2024, exactly 43 years after Raymond Cole's death, they held a ceremony. Patricia, Daniel, and several members of the trucker community gathered at mile marker 53. The ruined Kenworth sat on the shoulder, hauled there on a flatbed trailer. A local minister performed a blessing, honoring Raymond's memory and hoping his spirit would finally find peace. Patricia placed flowers on the truck's hood and spoke about her uncle, the man she barely remembered, but whose tragic story had defined part of her family's history. As the sun set that December evening, the group stood in silence, hoping for some sign that Raymond's spirit had been released. But there was nothing unusual, just the desert wind and the passing traffic on Highway 93. Daniel wasn't disappointed. He hadn't really expected Raymond to appear in physical form, but he hoped that somehow, somewhere, Raymond's spirit knew that his truck had been found. The group dispersed, and the truck was eventually donated to a transportation museum in Ely, where it was partially restored and displayed with a plaque explaining Raymond Cole's story and the legend of the following light. In the months following the ceremony, Daniel continued to monitor reports of light sightings on Highway 93. What he found was remarkable. In December, January, and February following the ceremony, there were 0 reported sightings of the following light. This was unprecedented. There had never been a 3-month period without at least one reported encounter since 1981. By March, some drivers were reporting brief sightings again, But the encounters were different. The light appeared for only a few minutes before disappearing. It didn't pursue vehicles, it didn't match speeds. It simply appeared on the shoulder, remained visible briefly, and vanished. It was as if Raymond was still present, but no longer searching, no longer desperate, just watching. Daniel wanted to believe that finding the truck had brought Raymond peace, or at least reduced his need to search every vehicle on the highway. Maybe knowing that his truck had been found, that someone cared enough to look for it and honor his memory, had been enough to ease whatever torment kept his spirit bound to Highway 93. Daniel Hawkins still drives trucks for a living. He has returned to Highway 93 many times since his encounter with the following light, but he has never seen it again. Sometimes late at night, when the moon is full and the desert is silent, Daniel thinks about Raymond Cole. He thinks about a man whose entire life was destroyed by a single act of theft, whose death was lonely and cold, whose spirit wandered for over 4 decades, searching for what was taken from him. And Daniel hopes that wherever Raymond is now, he has found peace. Daniel maintains his website documenting encounters with the following light. The site has become a resource for drivers who experience the phenomenon and need to know they're not alone, that they're not crazy, that what they saw was real. New reports still come in occasionally. Most describe brief sightings lasting just a few minutes. The aggressive, relentless pursuits that were common before 2024 have become rare. It's as if Raymond's spirit has been partially satisfied, no longer desperately searching, but still present, still watching the highway where he spent his final hours. Patricia Cole Harrison visits Raymond's restored truck at the Transportation Museum in Ely several times a year. She has placed flowers on the display case and added photographs of Raymond from when he was alive and happy. The museum's plaque tells Raymond's full story, ensuring that visitors understand this isn't just an old truck, but a memorial to a man whose tragedy became a legend. Researchers continue to investigate the following light phenomenon. Some remain convinced it's mass hallucination or misidentified natural phenomena. Others acknowledge that something genuinely unexplained occurs on Highway 93, something that defies conventional explanations. Academic papers have been written, documentaries have been filmed, and the legend has spread beyond the trucking community into popular culture. But for those who have actually encountered the light, who have felt that presence following them through the darkness, who have heard that sad voice asking, "Is it mine?" The experience is undeniably real. They know what they saw, they know what they felt, and they know that Highway 93 through Nevada is a place where the boundary between the living and the dead becomes thin, where spirits can manifest as light, where a man's grief and loss can echo through decades. The legend states that if you drive